Just stay in the car, okay? My parents are old school. They wouldn't get you. Caleb didn't look at me as he spoke. He was too busy adjusting the sleeves of the $200 Italian merino wool sweater I had bought him for his birthday. He reached into the back seat of my Audi Q5, grabbing 4 heavy bags of organic groceries, prime rib, artisanal cheeses, and 3 bottles of vintage Bordeaux. All of it was charged to my Amex. I sat in the driver's seat, the engine idling with a low, expensive hum. The afternoon sun hit the suburban driveway, illuminating the dust motes in the air. I looked at Caleb. He was 28, handsome in a rugged, unpolished way, and currently treating me like a shameful secret. 8 months, Caleb, I said, my voice as flat as a dial tone. And I'm still some girl you're talking to? Don't start, he snapped, kneeling back in. You're an executive. You're intimidating. My mom wants me with a nice, simple girl. Just give me 10 minutes to drop these off. Don't ruin this. He slammed the door. I watched him walk toward the front porch of the modest brick house, swinging my groceries with the confidence of a provider. He thought he was protecting his ego. He didn't realize he was standing on a trap door I had built with my own money. I didn't feel a rush of anger. I felt a cold, surgical precision. I checked the time on my Cartier. 2:14 p.m. By 2:20 p.m., the version of Caleb that existed in this house would be dead. Before we dive into how a woman of my standing ended up playing chauffeur to a ghost, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Are you listening from the office, your car, or late at night? Let me know. I read every single one. I am a woman who builds systems. At 25, as a junior executive at a top-tier firm, my entire life is a series of optimized processes. I understand spreadsheets, market volatility, and long-term ROI. But I had made the one mistake a professional should never make. I fell for a project. When I met Caleb, I mistook his lack of ambition for authenticity. He was a freelance graphic designer, a title that, in his case, was a polite euphemism for unemployed and waiting for inspiration. He lived in a studio apartment that smelled of stale coffee and unwashed laundry, but he spoke with a confidence that felt like intellectual depth. He was a jerk, but at the time, I convinced myself he was just unfiltered. In the boardroom, I am the person who identifies the leak in a sinking ship. In my private life, I was the one pouring water into the vessel, while Caleb sat on the deck and complained about the temperature. The psychology of our dynamic was simple: intermittent reinforcement. Caleb was a master of the cold-warm cycle. He would spend 3 days being distant, barely replying to texts, making me feel like a liability in his creative process. Then, just as I was ready to walk away, he would drop a crumb of affection. "You look beautiful today," whispered as a favor. A hand placed on my lower back for exactly 5 seconds before he'd pull away, claiming public displays of affection were performative and shallow. I was being conditioned. He was training me to work for his approval. He needed me to feel small so he could feel significant. He knew I had the title, the salary, and the stature. To neutralize my power, he attacked my vanity. He made me wait for his attention like a stray dog waiting for a bone. My friends asked me why I stayed. I told them he had potential. I told them he was misunderstood. The truth was the sunk cost fallacy. I had already invested so much energy into fixing him, buying him better clothes, paying for his networking dinners, offering him my car for his errands, that walking away felt like admitting I had made a bad investment, and I don't lose money. But that day in the driveway, looking at the back of his head as he walked away with my groceries, the project phase ended. I finally saw Caleb for what he was. An ordinary man who was using my extraordinary resources to maintain the illusion of success. He wasn't a misunderstood artist. He was a parasite who had forgotten that a host can simply stop feeding. The air in the car was cool, filtered by the Audi's climate control. Outside, Caleb was knocking on his parents' door. He thought he had successfully hidden me. He didn't realize that in my world, when a department is underperforming and draining the budget, we don't just hide it. We liquidate it. To understand the depth of Caleb's audacity, you have to look at the numbers. In my line of work, we don't look at what people say. We look at their balance sheets. And Caleb's was written in red ink. When we started dating 8 months ago, he sold me a dream of a man who was restructuring his portfolio. He claimed his design firm had hit a rough patch during a merger. He didn't need a handout, he said. He just needed a bridge. I believed him because I wanted to. I was the bridge, and for 8 months, he walked all over me. 3 months into the relationship, I started keeping a mental ledger. It wasn't because I was stingy. I'm a generous woman to those who deserve it. It was because the patterns were becoming impossible to ignore. It started with the forgotten wallet at dinner. Then it was the emergency car repair. By month 5, I was essentially his silent venture capitalist, except there were no dividends. Let's talk about the grocery deliveries. For the last 90 days, Caleb had been helping his parents out. He told me they were struggling and that he, the dutiful, successful son, was taking care of them. He asked me to set up a recurring delivery from a high-end organic grocer because his business account was tied up in escrow. The breakdown of the last 12 weeks looked like this. Weekly grocery deliveries. $350 times 12 equals $4,200. His car insurance, premium plan. $210 times 8 equals $1,680. The merino wardrobe upgrade, $1,450. Business networking dinners, totaling $2,900. Direct cash transfers for utilities, $3,200. The total investment in Caleb's life was hovering just over $13,430. And that didn't include the value of the time I spent editing his pitches, or the fuel he burned in my car. He wasn't just taking my money. He was using it to build a false persona. To his parents, he was the prodigal son, returning with bags of expensive meats and wine. He told them he was killing it in the tech design space. He never mentioned that the ribeye they were searing was paid for by the woman sitting in the driveway. What made it truly clinical was his psychological strategy. He knew that if I felt like his equal, I would eventually demand an equal return on my investment. So, he worked tirelessly to make me feel like I was lucky to even be in his presence. He'd criticize my taste in music. He'd mock my corporate mindset, calling it soulless. He would go hours without texting me back, then claim he was deep in a creative flow. He used my resources to fund his lifestyle, then used his creative integrity as a weapon to make me feel like my financial success was somehow less meaningful than his imagined talent. It was a classic parasite-host relationship. He needed the host to stay healthy enough to keep producing, but weak enough to never fight back. One specific Tuesday stands out. I had just closed a 6-figure deal for my firm. I was buzzing with adrenaline and wanted to celebrate at a rooftop bar we both liked. Caleb's response? I don't really feel like being around those finance types, Victoria. It's all so shallow. Why don't you just pick up some Thai food and come over? Oh, and get the duck salad I like. I'm a bit short until Friday. I paid for the duck salad. I sat on his lumpy sofa. I listened to him talk about his vision. I realized then that I wasn't his girlfriend. I was his patron. I was the silent partner in a failing business called Caleb's Ego. The most insulting part wasn't the money. It was the secrecy. He told me his parents were judgmental and old-fashioned. He said they wouldn't understand our modern dynamic. Now, looking at the house from the driver's seat of my Audi, I realized the truth. He wasn't hiding me because they were judgmental. He was hiding me because I was the evidence. I was the proof that he was a fraud. If they met me, a polished, successful executive, the lie of his independent success would shatter instantly. He couldn't risk them seeing the person who actually kept their pantry full. I leaned back against the leather headrest. My finger traced the steering wheel. The ledger was complete. The audit was over. The debt was due. In the corporate world, we call it the sunk cost fallacy. It's that dangerous moment when you realize an investment is failing, but you keep pouring resources into it because you can't bear the thought of having wasted what you've already spent. Caleb was my sunk cost. He had turned our relationship into a psychological obstacle course. He didn't use physical force or screaming. He used the jerk persona. It was a calculated, low-level, abrasive behavior designed to keep me on the defensive. If I dressed up for a gala, he wouldn't compliment me. He'd look at my dress, smirk, and say, "It's a bit much, don't you think? You're trying so hard to be corporate elite." He enjoyed acting like a jerk because my reactions were his entertainment. He'd wait for me to get frustrated, to reach the point of tears, and then he'd laugh. "Relax, Victoria. You're so high-strung. This is why you need me, to keep you grounded." That was the conditioning. He repositioned my professional excellence as a personality flaw. My ambition was greed. My attention to detail was neurosis. My desire for a partner who actually liked me was neediness. He mistook my patience for a lack of options. He truly believed that because I didn't leave the first time he mocked my poetry, or the 10th time he forgot his card, I never would. He saw my silence as submission. In reality, my silence was data collection. I remember one specific evening when I bought a bottle of $150 scotch to celebrate my promotion to senior lead. Caleb poured himself a double, sat back, and said, "You know, this tastes exactly like the $40 stuff. You're just paying for the label because you're obsessed with status." I didn't argue. I just watched him drink the status he claimed to despise. He used a tactic called intermittent reinforcement. He'd be a nightmare for 6 days, dismissive, cold, and financially demanding. Then, on the 7th day, he'd bring me a single wildflower he'd picked from the park and spend 20 minutes telling me how I was the only person who truly got his article. Those moments were the crumbs that kept me from starving. He knew exactly how much affection was required to keep the host alive. This is how narcissists operate. They don't want an equal. They want a mirror that only reflects their best angles. By keeping me hidden from his family and devaluing me in private, he was attempting to lower my market value in my own eyes. He wanted me to believe that outside of the world of spreadsheets and stock options, I was unlovable. He was so confident in his conditioning that he had become sloppy. He thought the mask he'd built, the successful provider son, was impenetrable. He didn't realize that I am an expert at unmasking underperforming assets. The conditioning was over. The circuit breaker had finally clicked. The clarity didn't arrive like a lightning bolt. It arrived like a cold, calculated audit on February 14th. Valentine's Day is a day of aesthetics, and I appreciate the ritual. I had booked a table at a bistro that required a 3-month lead time. I had a gift waiting for Caleb, a vintage watch that screamed established rather than struggling. But Caleb decided to use the holiday as a stage for his final performance of dominance. He arrived 40 minutes late to my apartment. He didn't bring roses. He brought a handful of cheap, wilted daisies wrapped in crinkly plastic from a gas station. He didn't offer an apology. He offered a lecture. "I saw the way people were lined up at the florist," he said, tossing the daisies onto my marble countertop. "It's pathetic, Victoria. These corporations have you programmed to think that spending $50 on weeds is love. I refuse to participate in the commercialization of my feelings." Then, he produced a bar of dark chocolate. He knew I found dark chocolate unpalatable. The bitterness sets my teeth on edge. But he insisted it was for my own good, because it was pure. The centerpiece of his disrespect was the poem. I had written him a short, sincere piece about our potential. He read it, let out a sharp, mocking exhale, and folded it into a paper airplane. It's a bit regret-coded, don't you think? Very Hallmark. Even later that night, the liability of his ego followed us into the bedroom. He operated with a staggering lack of basic competence, mistaking aggression for passion and force for skill. He was a man who refused to learn the landscape of his partner because he was too busy admiring his own reflection in the dark. I lay there in the silence afterward, staring at the ceiling. I realized that Caleb wasn't unconventional or edgy. He was just a man who lacked the resources to be great, so he chose to be a jerk to hide his mediocrity. The final straw came the next morning, when he asked for the grocery run. "My parents need a few things," he said, casually scrolling through my delivery app. "I'll drive your car. You can come, but you'll have to wait in the Audi. My dad's been stressed, and seeing a new girl, especially one who looks like you, might be too much for him to process right now." One who looks like me. A woman of standing. A woman who paid for his car insurance. That was it. The breaking point. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the chocolate. I simply checked the battery on my phone and grabbed my coat. "Fine," I said. "Let's go." As Caleb walked toward the front door, the Audi's cabin became my war room. I didn't reach for a tissue. I reached for my phone. I opened my banking app and began the family solvency audit. I had been blind, but the numbers were agonizingly clear. I looked at the recurring payments I had authorized for Caleb's support services. The grocery deliveries alone were a $1,400 monthly leak. The bridge loans that were never repaid, the car insurance for the vehicle he drove but I owned. I sat there, watching the porch light flicker on. I could see Caleb through the window, hugging his mother, handing her the bags of prime rib like he was the conquering hero returning from a hunt. I watched his father clap him on the back, likely praising him for being such a provider. My finger hovered over the cancel recurring payment button. In my world, you don't just stop a project, you perform a post-mortem. I needed to understand exactly why I had allowed a $13,430 liability to sit on my books for 8 months. The answer was simple. I had been paying for the idea of a partner. Caleb was just the empty suit I had dressed up in my own expectations. I opened a note on my phone and titled it Liquidation Strategy. Cut the cord. Terminate all automated transfers immediately. Asset recovery. Reclaim the car insurance policy and the grocer's membership. The reveal. Caleb's power came from his secrecy. To destroy the power, I had to destroy the secret. Final settlement. Exit the premises with 0 emotional debt. I calculated the ROI of staying for 1 more minute. It was negative. Every second I sat in this car, following his stay in the car command, I was devaluing my own brand. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't see a hurt girlfriend. I saw a chief executive. I saw a woman who had just realized she was the majority shareholder in Caleb's entire life, and she was about to call for an emergency board meeting. Caleb thought he was protecting his parents from intimidating Victoria. The truth was, He was protecting himself from the reality that without me, his parents didn't eat steak. Without me, his car didn't have insurance. Without me, he was just a 28-year-old man in a studio apartment with a vision and an empty fridge. I felt a surge of cold, electric clarity. It was the same feeling I get right before a hostile takeover. It's not about anger. It's about the satisfying click of a puzzle piece falling into place. I checked my watch. 2:18 p.m. Caleb had asked for 10 minutes. I decided to give him exactly 4. I didn't need to wait for him to come back to the car and offer me a condescending pat on the head for being a good girl and staying put. I turned off the ignition. The low hum of the Audi died, replaced by a silence that was heavy and absolute. I reached for the door handle. I wasn't just getting out of a car. I was stepping out of a narrative that didn't serve me. I was moving from the project phase to the divestment phase. I stepped out onto the gravel. The sound of my heels, $800 Italian leather, hitting the stones was the first shot fired. I didn't slam the car door. I closed it with a soft, expensive click that echoed against the suburban quiet. I stood there for a heartbeat, smoothing the front of my tailored wool coat. The air was crisp, smelling of dormant lawns and wood smoke. Across the yard, through the large bay window of the living room, I could see them. Caleb was gesturing animatedly, his face bright with the false glow of a man telling a very tall tale. I started the walk. Every step was a deliberate, tactical move. I wasn't rushing. I was enjoying the transition from the secret in the car to the reality at the door. I walked past the crates of empty beer bottles Caleb had left near the garage, another expense I'd likely indirectly funded. I reached the porch steps. Caleb's back was to the door. I could hear his voice through the wood, boisterous, confident, and utterly fraudulent. "Yeah, the firm is expanding into the European market, Dad. It's been a grind, but someone has to keep the lights on around here, right? I told the grocer to send the premium cuts this time. You guys deserve it." I didn't knock. That would imply I was a guest requesting entry. Instead, I turned the handle. Caleb had left it unlocked, a habit of a man who felt entirely too comfortable in his lies. I stepped into the foyer. The smell of the roasting ribeye, my ribeye, hit me instantly. "Caleb?" his mother asked, looking past him. Her eyes widened. She saw a woman in a $2,000 outfit standing in her hallway with the posture of someone who owned the air she breathed. Caleb froze. The glass of Bordeaux in his hand tilted dangerously. He turned, and for a split second, I saw a look of pure, unadulterated terror. It wasn't the look of a boyfriend surprised to see his partner. It was the look of a scam artist seeing the FBI at the door. "Victoria," he stammered, his voice dropping 2 octaves. I told you I'd be right out. My dad's heart, the stress. You shouldn't be in here." He moved toward me, trying to physically herd me back toward the exit. He put a hand on my shoulder, the same dismissive, wait your turn gesture he'd used for 8 months. I didn't move. I looked down at his hand until he pulled it away, as if my coat had burned him. "The stress, Caleb?" I asked, my voice projected with the perfect boardroom resonance, clear, calm, and impossible to interrupt. "I think your parents have a right to know the status of their accounts. It's a matter of transparency." "Caleb, who is this?" his father asked, standing up from his recliner. He looked confused, but he also looked impressed. He saw the watch, the shoes, and the clarity in my eyes. He knew immediately that I wasn't some girl his son was talking to. "She's just a colleague, Dad, from the design project. She's very high-strung. She doesn't know when to turn it off," Caleb said, his face turning a deep, mottled red. He turned back to me, his eyes pleading, begging me to play along with the lie. Victoria, please, let's talk about the contract outside. There is no contract outside, Caleb, I said. I pulled my phone from my pocket and turned the screen toward the room. I had the Family Solvency Audit note open, along with a digital copy of the $400 grocery receipt from 20 minutes ago. I'm Victoria, I said, looking directly at his mother. And I'm the one who has been paying for your groceries, your son's insurance, and the very wine he's currently drinking. Caleb isn't a partner in a firm. He's a line item in my personal budget, and today, I'm cutting the funding. The silence that followed was cinematic. It was the sound of a legacy shattering in real time. The transition from confident provider to cornered animal happened in less than 3 seconds. Caleb's glass of Bordeaux didn't just tilt, it slipped. It shattered against the hardwood floor, the deep red liquid spreading like a crime scene across his mother's rug. He didn't even notice. Victoria, shut up! You're having a breakdown. Dad, Mom, she's obsessed with me. She's unstable. His voice had jumped to a panicked, thin screech. He was vibrating with a frantic, disorganized energy. He stepped toward his father, hands outstretched, trying to create a physical barrier between the truth and his audience. She's lying because I was going to break up with her. This is a revenge thing. I stood perfectly still. In the face of his chaos, my stillness was a weapon. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply swiped to the next screen on my phone, the banking app's transaction history. Is it a revenge thing, Caleb? I asked, my voice smooth and clinical. Or is it $4,200 in groceries over 12 weeks? Is it the $1,680 I paid to Progressive for your car insurance because you claimed your business account was frozen? Or maybe the $3,200 in direct transfers I sent to your landlord so you wouldn't be evicted while you found your muse. His mother, a woman who had spent the last hour praising her son's generosity, looked at the phone. She looked at the names on the transactions. Victoria R. External transfer to Caleb M. Then she looked at the bags of prime rib on her counter. Caleb? She whispered. It wasn't an accusation yet. It was the sound of a mother watching her hero son dissolve into a ghost. You told us you were the senior creative lead. You said you were taking care of us because the firm was doing so well. I am, Mom, I am. Caleb turned back to me, his face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly hatred. The jerk persona was gone, replaced by a desperate, flailing cowardice. You're a monster, Victoria. You're trying to destroy my family because I wouldn't marry you. You think your money makes you better than everyone, but you're nothing. You're just a suit. I am a suit, I agreed, nodding slightly. A suit that has been subsidizing your entire existence. A suit that is currently revoking your access to the firm's capital. He lunged for my phone, a pathetic, clumsy attempt to snatch the evidence. I stepped back, one precise movement, and he stumbled over the edge of the rug, his hand splashing into the puddle of spilled wine. He looked up at me from the floor, his face wet with Bordeaux and sweat. Please, he hissed, his voice dropping to a low, desperate bargain. Victoria, don't do this. Not here. I'll pay you back, every cent. Just let me keep this. Let me have this with them. The conditioning was finally broken. He wasn't the powerful intellectual anymore. He was a small man on a stained rug, begging for the right to keep lying. He was bargaining for the shadows. The audit is closed, Caleb, I said. The debt isn't financial anymore. It's moral. And you're bankrupt. The room felt smaller now, crowded by the weight of Caleb's exposure. His father, a man who had clearly spent his life valuing hard work, looked at his son on the floor with a mixture of pity and profound disgust. He didn't offer a hand to help him up. Caleb, his father said, his voice gravelly and heavy. Is any of it true? The firm? The European expansion? Did you buy any of this? He gestured vaguely at the groceries, the sweater Caleb was wearing, and the life he had been performing. Caleb opened his mouth, but only a dry, pathetic sound came out. He looked at me, his eyes darting like a trapped rodent's. He was looking for a weakness, a crack in my armor where he could insert one last insult to regain control. She manipulated me. Dad, he finally wheezed, scrambling to his feet. He wiped the wine-stained hand on his expensive trousers. She used the money to control me. She wouldn't let me work. She wanted a trophy she could pay for. I'm the victim here. I almost laughed. It was the ultimate narcissist's pivot, the transition from provider to victim the second the hero mask falls off. I stepped forward, closing the gap between us. I didn't flinch as he recoiled. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a single, heavy stock business card. It was matte black with silver embossed lettering. My name, my title, my direct office line. I didn't give it to Caleb. I handed it to his mother. Mrs. Miller, I said, my voice softening just enough to show respect, but staying firm enough to maintain authority. I'm sorry for the intrusion and the mess on your rug, but I believe in due diligence. On the back of that card, I've written the name of the grocery service and the login credentials for the account Caleb's been using. I've already removed my credit card, but I've left a $50 credit on there, so you have breakfast tomorrow. Victoria, stop it! Caleb stepped toward me, his hand raised as if to snatch the card. You're embarrassing yourself. Get out of my parents' house. It's not your house, Caleb, I said, turning to face him. And after today, it's not your sanctuary either. You told me I was intimidating because you were afraid I'd do exactly what I'm doing now, telling the truth. You kept me in the car because I'm the only person in your life who knows you're a fraud. You aren't old school, and your parents aren't judgmental. You're just a parasite who's terrified of being found out. I looked him up and down, from the merino wool sweater I'd paid for to the shoes I'd encouraged him to buy so he could look the part. If you're too shy to acknowledge our relationship, I said, my voice echoing in the silent house, then you'll be relieved to know it no longer exists. I've already canceled the insurance on the car you're driving. Since it's technically in my name, you have exactly 1 hour to drive it back to my apartment and leave the keys with the concierge. If it's not there by 4 p.m., I'm reporting it stolen. You wouldn't, Caleb whispered, his face pale. I'm an executive, Caleb. I don't make empty threats. I make executive decisions. I turned back to his parents. It was a pleasure to finally meet you. I only wish it had been under the circumstances Caleb described. He's a very talented storyteller. It's just a shame he's so poor at managing his own reality. I walked toward the door. Caleb tried to follow me, a desperate stream of insults and pleas falling from his lips. You're a cold, heartless bitch. You'll never find anyone who loves you for you. Everyone just wants your money. I stopped at the threshold, my hand on the brass knob. I didn't look back at him. I looked at the horizon. I'd rather be a cold bitch with a balanced ledger than a nice girl funding a lie, I said. And as for love, I don't need someone to love me for my money. I need someone who doesn't need my money to feel like a man. I stepped out onto the porch. The door clicked shut behind me, cutting off the sound of Caleb's first real argument with his father. The air outside was better. It felt clean. It felt like a fresh start. The drive back was the most silent 20 minutes of my year. In the Audi, the only sound was the rhythmic click of the turn signal and the subtle purr of the engine. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need the noise. I was performing a digital scorched earth policy. At a red light, I pulled out my phone. My thumb moved with surgical speed. Step 1. Open the Progressive app. Remove driver Caleb M. The policy update was instantaneous. I felt a strange, cold satisfaction knowing that if he hit a pothole on his way back, he was personally liable for every cent. Step 2. Open the grocery app. Delete saved payment method. Change password. Step 3. Venmo. Cancel pending request. Block user. I watched his name disappear from my digital ecosystem. It was like watching a ghost be exorcised. For 8 months, my phone had been a source of anxiety, waiting for the cold text, the demand for money, or the subtle jab at my character. Now, it was just a tool again. I arrived at my building at 3:42 p.m. I handed my spare key to Marcus, the concierge who had seen Caleb come and go for months. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady, "Caleb will be dropping off a vehicle shortly. He is to leave the keys with you. He is not permitted past the lobby. If he attempts to go to my floor, please call security immediately." Marcus nodded, his expression neutral, but his eyes observant. "Understood, Miss Victoria. Everything all right?" "The department has been restructured," I said with a thin smile. "The dead weight has been liquidated." I went up to my penthouse. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out over the city. Below, the world was moving as it always did, busy, transactional, and indifferent. At 3:58 p.m., I saw my car pull into the circular drive. I watched from 20 stories up as Caleb got out. Even from this distance, his posture was shattered. He didn't look like the intellectual jerk who mocked my taste in poetry. He looked like a man who had just realized that the safety net he had been mocking was the only thing keeping him from the pavement. He stood by the car for a long time, looking up at the building. He probably thought I was watching. He probably expected me to come running down, to offer a tearful reconciliation, to tell him that I couldn't live without his creative spark. He was wrong. I wasn't crying. I was pouring myself a glass of chilled Sancerre, one I had paid for, and one I wouldn't have to share. I watched him hand the keys to Marcus and walk toward the bus stop. He was carrying nothing but the shame I had finally forced him to wear. The audit was officially over. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of the space Caleb had been occupying with his ego and his unwashed laundry. I walked to the kitchen and looked at the wilted gas station daisies he'd thrown on my counter earlier that morning. I picked them up and dropped them into the trash bin. The crinkly plastic made a pathetic final sound. I didn't feel lonely. I felt efficient. An hour later, there was a knock at my door. A delivery courier stood there holding a massive, heavy vase. Inside were 3 dozen long-stemmed Baccara roses, so deep red they were almost black. The velvet petals were perfect, the scent filling the hallway. I hadn't waited for a man to realize my value. I had gone online and bought them for myself with the money I saved by canceling Caleb's grocery delivery for the week. I placed them on my dining table. They were a masterpiece of clarity. Caleb is currently back in his studio apartment, likely trying to explain to his parents why their successful son can no longer afford to send them organic ribeye. He is realizing that when you treat a high-yield investment like a disposable asset, you eventually lose the principal. I didn't just break up with him. I liquidated a failing venture. I reclaimed my time, my capital, and my dignity. I don't need a man to make my life better. I already made it perfect. I just removed the only part of it that was ordinary. If you've ever had to become the villain in someone else's story just to survive yours, hit that like button and share this. Let me know in the comments, Have you ever had to cut off a parasite to save your own peace? How did it feel when you finally hit delete? Don't forget to subscribe. We're building a community of people who know their worth and aren't afraid to audit their lives. Remember, your love is an investment. Don't fund failing assets.